President does like to get even, you say? The Obama administration, this is in the Washington Times this morning, has issued new guidelines that could make it harder for governors who deny climate change to obtain federal disaster preparedness funds. That's FEMA, by the way, the Federal Emergency Management Agency's new rules could put some Republican governors in a bind. The rule says that states' risk assessments must include, quote, you ready for this? Consideration of changing environmental or climate conditions that may affect or influence the long-term vulnerability from hazards in the state, unquote. In other words, you have to basically go along with climate change. You have to accept the premise. That's not bullying, is it? No. The policy goes into effect in March of 2016, doesn't affect federal money for relief after a hurricane, flood, or other natural disaster, but states seeking disaster preparedness money from Washington will be required to assess how climate change threatens their communities, a requirement that was not included in FEMA's 2008 guidelines. Isn't that interesting? In 2008, the president was just trying to get elected. FEMA says it recognizes there exists inherent uncertainty about future conditions and will work with states to identify tools and approaches that enable decision-making to reduce risk and increase resilience from a changing climate, quote unquote. An understanding of vulnerabilities will assist with prioritizing mitigation actions and policies that reduce risk from future events. But they also say that some of the monies might be withheld for governors who don't agree with that. Like Bobby Jindal, for example, who has said he does not agree with climate change, and some other Republican governors who are out there as a group of governors who are not in agreement with that. So again, the president bypasses the Congress, goes through one of his regulatory groups to get this idea that climate change is the most important thing in our country, right? Pushed on to people whether they like it or not. But he's not a bully, is he? Let's go to Joe in York. Joe, you're first up with the Gary Sutton Show. Good morning, Joe. How are you?
I'm real good, Gary. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Your thoughts?
Well, I'm a supporter of the president.
Okay.
And I think in what your discussion has been this morning, you're completely ignoring that Congress has the ability now to pass whatever laws that they want to pass and leave it up to the president to veto or not veto them.
Well, they do and they don't.
Starting out with Loretta Lynch.
Well,
put her up for nomination,
sure.
Up or down. Let her go. Get somebody else if she can't pass.
Yeah, that would be a good way of looking at it. I think get an up or down. Didn't we hear that a lot during the Democratic time when Harry Reid was the Senate, and none of that got to them? None of the laws were allowed for an up or down vote. What happened there? How did you feel about that?
I thought we weren't going to talk about the past, but I guess we can.
Well, no.
But what about the Republican legislature all day long? If you want to do that.
Well, we could do that, Joe. But I'm surprised that you support the president. I respect it, but I'm surprised. Why? How can you still support it when there's so many incongruities and so many things that he's done that have been falsehoods throughout?
Well, number one, as an American, I think I have some, fidelity toward elected officials and what's best for America as a whole.
He's my president too. I do too. That's why I'm wondering why you still support him, because I'm not sure he looks at America as a whole. I think he looks at America in part.
Well, he's in a position now where he's trying to lead the country.
Is he?
And the Congress has to come along with him. I've listened to the budget, at least the Senate budget talks on C-SPAN. I didn't get to hear the House. We're going to have a very interesting conversation about priorities in this country when we get to the budget. And that's going to be a 51% vote when it comes to the budget. So he'll have to veto those things if he doesn't come up with a compromise.
Right.
With immigration, Congress has nothing stopping them from passing a bill now and sending it to the president saying this is immigration
But
reform.
The president doesn't have the right to do what he's doing. That's the point. Isn't that unconstitutional to say you can make illegal legal? Isn't that whether or not the Congress, I'm not giving the Congress a whole lot of credit on this either, Joe. I'm with you on that. Republicans or Democrats alike. And if you heard me talk, you've heard me say that. But when you don't have the right to do something and you continue to do it, when you say I've got a pen and a phone, that's a threat. The Americans ought not be threatened. Government is supposed to be a limiting factor. It's not supposed to be an enabling factor. You're not supposed to take powers which you are not given by the Constitution under yourself. That's not his right. That is not his right.
The president has begged Congress to pass an immigration bill.
He still doesn't have the right to assume a power that's not given to him, whether he begged them or not. I'm sorry. You don't have the right to go take on that which is not given to you. You are the executing officer of the government. You are not the lawmaking officer of the government. And therein is where I think you get kind of mixed up on this, Joe. But I appreciate your call. I've got to go to a break here because I'm at the top of the hour. You can't take laws and do what you want to do with them. There's a difference right there between a left view of the world and a right view of the world. The left says, well, the Congress isn't doing it, therefore he should be able to do that. No, he shouldn't. That's where you're wrong. I'm going to actually cancel the segment I was going to have with a guy the next half hour because I want to open up this last hour. Okay? I want to open up this last hour. Your thoughts about, and Joe agree with the president, and I respect that. I want to know from more of you who agree with the president. I'm glad Joe took the time. And Joe, if you want to call back and spend a little more time with me, I'll be glad to do that too because we're ready to hard break. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show. I canceled our guest for this hour. We're going to have him for tomorrow, by the way, Brian. We'll have him for tomorrow at 10:05, yeah. Steve Camerata, who's with the Center for Immigration Studies, will be with us tomorrow instead at 10:05. He was going to be with us at 11:05 today. I want to open up the lines this whole hour because I think Joe started a very good conversation there with me. And, Joe, you're welcome to call back and we can finish that off because I had to run to a hard break. I truly did. So I'd be glad to get you in because I didn't want to just think I tagged you with a final word and then you didn't get a chance. So if you'd like to get back in, you are more than welcome. 1-800-357-0910. That will go for all of you. Joe said something really interesting to me, and I was really mulling it over during the break. And thank you, Joe, for spurring my thoughts. But the point that he made, I said, why do you support the president? He said, well, I kind of intimated, and I don't know if I'm saying this quite right, but basically the idea that, I respect the office of the presidency. And so do I. And that's why I'm upset, because I don't think this president does. Because, see, when I respect the office of the presidency as a citizen, and again, Joe, you're welcome to call back in and finish off our conversation. I think that I respect the president who is going to operate within what the Constitution says he can do. And the thing that troubled me that Joe said as a last caller there, and you can call 1-800-357-0910 right now. And this came off what I talked about in the last segment, which was I think the president is a bully. And I truly do. I think the president is a bully who sidesteps Congress constantly. Now, Congress is no day at the beach. Don't get me wrong. But because Congress isn't doing something doesn't mean you have the right to do it. If you don't believe that, then you need to study the Constitution a little bit more carefully. Joe sounded like a pretty intelligent guy. But this idea that if you want to do it, you could do it. No. I respect the presidency when people who operate as president operate within the confines of the Constitution. They're not always trying to push the outer envelope of it. To understand what a president and a Congress and a Supreme Court and the lower courts need to do, you have to understand the history of where our Constitution was. And the history is that it was written as a limiting document. Limiting. That means they were limiting what the government could do. And why? Well, it's a natural morphing over there because they just got done fighting against a country that had no limits on their power. And it said we could do whatever we want to you. And they said, no, that's not the way this operates. And they came up with this Constitution. And we apparently have decided it's pretty good because we swear allegiance to it even today. And the idea that it started into operation back in 1789, and again, because many didn't trust that their rights would be protected, we had a number of states hold out on voting for it until 1791. There was 10 rights passed, called the Bill of Rights. And then 17 more amendments put on top of that in these 230 some years. 27 changes to our Constitution in 230 years, 230 plus. That's pretty good, isn't it? So we haven't scrapped it yet. So since we haven't scrapped it, we would assume that we're working under it. And since we all swear allegiance in the Congress, in the courts, as a president, we see him do it. It's a big deal because that's when he officially becomes president. What's the last thing he does? He swears allegiance with his hand on the Bible. And he says, I swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States. He says, I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. There is where I've got the problem right now. Faithfully executing the office of the President of the United States. And the very next line, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. Isn't that faithfully executing the office of the President of the United States? Isn't it assumed that you do that within the Constitution? Not your Constitution, not what you feel like doing, not, hey, Congress isn't doing this, therefore I have the right to do it. See, Joe, that's buying into the talking points. I'm talking about something much stronger here, which is the Constitution of the United States. Does it still matter to you? I want to believe in my president, but my president's got to play by the rules. I want to believe in my president, my Congress, and everybody else if they play by the rules. And the rules, there's only one set. The supreme law of our land is the United States Constitution. And every one of these people will tell you that. But not every one of these people will operate by it. 1-800-357-0910. I'm interested, again, and Joe said he supports the president. He says, you want to talk about, I'd be glad to talk a little longer with anybody who supports the president this morning, and why you do, because I'm intrigued. I support the presidency of the United States when it's held and operated properly. When it is a person who has decided to try to become a dictator in this country, who has decided to try to extend the rules far beyond what he was given, who does not respect the powers of the office itself, who does not obviously respect the Constitution of the United States, who takes rules unto himself, which he is not given, then I have a difficult time respecting that person occupying an office that holds more esteem than that. What do you think? And if you have good reasons, please tell me. The reason, though, cannot be, well, the Congress didn't act, therefore he needs to. Really? Where does it say that in the Constitution that he has the right to do that? Where does it say that? You know what it says in Article 2, the very thing? The executive power. You know what executive power, and is defined by the Federalists, is? It is the power to carry out the laws that Congress. By the way, the president, you notice, is Article 2 of the Constitution, not Article 1. What is Article 1? It's the legislative one. It's the one that talks about the Congress. All legislative powers. It doesn't say some. All legislative powers, the ability to make laws, herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives. And it talks in there later on in Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 1 to 17, exactly what the things are that they cannot do. And even some of those have been abridged by our president or our Supreme Court. We'll talk about that in a moment. Article 2 is the executive branch. So the president's job is to execute the laws passed by the first branch of government, which is the Congress. Doesn't say pick out the ones you like or you don't like. Doesn't say, well, you can legislate when Congress doesn't. Doesn't say that in there, Joe. Doesn't say that. It says executive, the carrying out of power. So I challenge each of you this morning to step in here and talk about this. We read an article from the Wall Street Journal this morning about the president, and capitulation is all he wants. I'm not asking the president to go in and force his agenda on us. People rejected his agenda back in November. That's why they put a whole lot of other people in there in hopes that they would have some different agenda, and that is yet to be seen. This is not about a Republican and a Democrat thing with me. This is not even about a right and left. This is about what is right and what is wrong in terms of how we deal with the Constitution, ladies and gentlemen. That's all this is. We are not here to have his agenda inflicted upon us so later on we have to throw it off and put something new in its place. We are here for these members of government to work together to carry out the Constitution of the United States and what it says we're going to do. And it's a pretty good document. How do you support this president right now in terms of executing laws, for example? Let me give you an example. And I'll come to the line in just a moment. Joseph, Bill, Mike, just be patient with me. We have one line open, 1-800-357-0910. How many suits have you seen today by the federal government against sanctuary cities in this country that say we are not going to prosecute illegal aliens in this country? How many suits? Trying to think? Let me help you. Zero by the federal government. Now, why do I say the federal government? Because the federal government, it has been established, are the ones who who basically have the power to deal with immigration. Okay? So let me ask you this. What has been done with regard to states which are trying to help with immigration? Let's Go back to Arizona. I think it was Law 1063 in Arizona. I might be off my number there, but you get the idea. A couple years ago, said they went by United States code, and they came up with a way that they would carry out the law, and they would check on illegals in the country, in their state. They're a border state in Arizona. And what happened? They were sued. They were sued by Eric Holder, the Attorney General, representing the Judicial Department, a part of the executive branch. They were sued. And the Supreme Court stuck by them. They were sued for saying we want to help and do our part as states in carrying out appropriate and lawful immigration procedures and punishing that which is not legal. That was not the only state that got sued. I believe Alabama and South Carolina also were on that list. Yet not one sanctuary city where illegals walk in and rampantly live that way, not one thing was done. Because why? Because the president's agenda says that illegal is legal. So plain and simple it is. We had hundreds of thousands of people come last summer. You remember we were talking about it, into this country illegally from Central America. What was done? When they crossed the border, they were hugging. They were running over and turning themselves in. Because the word was from the president's proclamation of 2012 that if you come here, you get in free. You say, oh, that's not true. That's not true, Gary. We flew them out. Many of them children, some of them young adults, some of them adults. We flew them out to every state in the union. In many cases, governors had not even been yet notified of that. Now, government, as set up this way, called federalism, is supposed to be a sharing of power between the federal government and the state governments. Is that a sharing of power? Or is that an inflicting of power? See, what I'm talking about here this morning is inflicting of power on our people by an administration which has decided that nobody else matters but them. And occasionally they need the Supreme Court to come along and help them a little bit too. That's what we've seen. That's what I've seen. What are you seeing? I want to hear your point of view. 1-800-357-0910. Now, if you don't like to be challenged, then don't call in. If you do, or if you like to challenge me with something other than, well, the Congress didn't do it, so the president has the right to, learn your history a little bit there, okay? That's not what the Constitution says he can do, even though that's what he thinks he can do. This particular president thinks he can do, and that's why I believe his actions are not in the best interest of the country. But that's my opinion. You already don't know that. What's yours? 1-800-357-0910. And don't give me right and left. Give me right and wrong. I'm interested in hearing from that standpoint. 1-800-357-0910. Joseph, Bill, and Mike, you're next up on the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA right after this. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Let's get to the phone lines on your thoughts about this president. Is he the bully president or not? Should a president be pushing the outer envelopes of the Constitution, or should they be abiding by the spirit of the Constitution, the ethics of it, the morals of it, not pushing the legality of it and trying to figure out ways to get around it? To me, this president is trying to figure out ways to get around it all the time. Let's go back to Joseph in New York. Joseph, you're on the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Good morning.
Morning, Gary. This is Joseph again. 27th of July, 1973, I was at Fort Riley, Kansas, and took the oath of office to be an officer in the United States Army.
Right.
And I swore by the oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution of this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I did not take an oath of office to a man. I took it to the law.
Yes.
And I believe in the law. And
that's the point, and I was trying to make it earlier. You said it better than I could right there, Joseph, that we took it to the law. We took it to defend the country. You didn't take it to defend the person in the country. And that's part of the problem, that we have a lot of people who they want to win so badly that they're willing to dump on a lot of people in this country to do that. They won't say. They won't say. Give me a second. No, Joseph, wait a second. I'll let you say something else, but I'm going to say my piece first. All right?
Okay,
hang on. And what happens is they are willing to take the part of the country that they like and say that's what we like, and to hell with everybody else. Now, they won't say that because it's not the right thing to say. You know, Joe wouldn't say that this morning because it's not the right thing to say, but that's the way I think a lot of them see the country. And unfortunately, they turn out to be on the so-called left. I hate to talk left and right, but that's kind of where you have to be, I guess, if you're looking at it. I have a tough time with that. I have a very tough time with that. Go ahead, Joseph.
Well, I go back to the history, as you say, and John Jay, the first Chief Justice to the Supreme Court, declared that the Constitution is what we say it is. And thereafter, most everybody was like Leonard Hand and other people that really followed the letter of the law to a good degree until we got to that President Delano Roosevelt, who tried to pack the Supreme Court to get his New Deal through. And that didn't work, but then the people retired and replaced, and it came to pass, and they did go through. So that's where I look at the decisions that were made with the Commerce Clause and et cetera.
Right.
The farmer couldn't grow wheat in his own land just to feed his own chickens because that had interstate commerce. And they've distorted the whole Constitution for over so many years that it's unrecognizable.
Well, and you mentioned the Commerce Clause, and Joseph, thank you for your call this morning. You've hit some great points. The Commerce Clause is the most recent one, from my standpoint, to have been violated. Remember, the president said we're going to have a mandate. We're going to have a mandate, all right? And the mandate was that, each person in this country had to pay a penalty. You had to pay a penalty if, you didn't basically buy insurance or buy health care, okay? And that was the argument that went to the Supreme Court. And it got there, and Chief Justice Roberts, who I think was totally off base on this, said, well, you can't have a mandate because there is no such thing as laid out in the Constitution under Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 1, okay? You can't have a mandate. Congress doesn't have the power to have a mandate in passing a law like this. But what they can do, he said, is they have the power to lay and collect taxes. Now, take a look at what it says exactly there. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and the general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. So apparently, because of the general welfare of the United States, Justice Roberts decided in the tie-breaking vote that you could not have a mandate, but you could replace that mandate with the idea of a tax. So you could be taxed for something you did not want to buy. Now, again, we get into an argument about you being a drag on society if you don't do that and all that kind of stuff. But the point was, he again interpreted the Constitution in a way that had to be very creative to come up with that particular solution. Why was it there? Because the president pushed the envelope and said, we're going to make you buy something. And he did it through Congress, a willing bunch of people on the Democratic side there to get it through. Was it good for our country? Well, did it open the door for other things to be abused later on? See, I think for a lot of people on a certain persuasion here, they don't think the Constitution really is applicable anymore to our lives. They think it's old-fashioned, out of date. Don't think that it really works. Now, will they say it? No, they'll never say it. You don't say that, which most people would think would be ridiculous, but they believe it. And if they didn't believe it, you wouldn't see them trying to do the things that they're doing. Your thoughts? Two lines open. Shouldn't be. 1-800-357-0910. Are you sitting on your hands? Put it on the telephone and dial it in. Let's go to Bill in Shiloh. You're up next, Bill, on the Gary Sutton Show. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Gary. This is a marvelous discussion that you're having this morning. I really appreciate it. And the things that I'm going to say, I certainly don't want to parrot you, but a lot of the things that you've been talking about this morning really resonate with me down to my core. And the reason being this, that when the President of the United States takes an oath, he takes an oath to the office of the President. He happens to be called that, but he took an oath to the office of the President, which is, of course, supported by the Constitution.
Right.
And he has violated that since day one. The thing that really spins me around with all of this is the executive order business. Now, I'm not a student of all of history. I can't give you the number of times that past presidents have written executive orders and so forth. But my sense is that when they wrote executive orders that matched up with a piece of legislation, what they were trying to do is they were trying to modify it to make it, quote, work better, unquote. And I don't even know whether that's a good phrase or not. But the point that I'm going to make is this, that they did that after legislation was already passed. This guy, what he does is he floats some ideas to see whether they could become law. And if they could not become law, he'll say, okay, I'm going to do you one better. I'm going to do this by executive order. I've got a pen and I've got a phone, and that's what I'm going to do. And it's this kind of stuff that is really causing the rancor of people today. And, nobody wants to talk about anybody being treasonous. But if you want to talk about somebody getting as close to being that as possible, this guy is doing that.
Well, your point's well taken. And so what you will have the people say who are listening to talking points will say, well, a lot of presidents use a lot more executive orders. That's true. Okay. A lot of people have used a lot more executive orders as president than this one does. But there are executive orders, and then there are executive orders that have a lasting and deep impact on people in this country on a much longer period of time, on much greater things. And when they deal with the very crux of the heart of the Constitution, then I think the executive order takes on a different kind of life of its own. And when they are trying to change, and as Joe said last hour, when you have a president who thinks about this and says, well, Congress isn't doing it, therefore I can, and now I'm using the executive order as a red cape so that the Congress now must do something, that is not the purpose of an executive order.
That's
okay,
exactly right.
That's not the way it's supposed to be used, and so he has the power to pass executive orders, but the point is, does he have the power to do it in place of legislation? Well, as I read the Constitution, and as you look over the years, no, he does not. It says all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, and it very specifically says those which they cannot do. It does not do the same for the President of the United States exactly. Maybe they should have done that if they'd have known a guy like Barack Obama might become the President of the United States. Bill, I've got to go to a break. I apologize. When I come back, I want to get Mike, who's been waiting. Mike, thank you for your patience. We're going to come right back to you after a short break. And there are 3 lines open. I want to care about our president, too. He's my president. But I want to know my president's playing by the rules. I want to know that my president looks at this as a limiting document. I want to think that he is limited in what he can do. And Joe, again, from last hour, when the president says what? Here's some talking points that I read one day, but they have to be true. When he says 22 times that I don't have the ability to make an executive order on immigration to make illegal legal, and then he does it. What? He said it is unconstitutional himself. I can't do that as president. That he does it? Did something change? Was there an amendment added in the meantime, Joe? I ask you that question out there, all of you. 1-800-357-0910. This is serious stuff. I normally don't get quite this serious over this, but this is something I feel very strongly about. I hope you do too, and I hope you'll weigh in. Don't sit back. 1-800-357-0910. And if you disagree with me, feel free to do that right here on the air. I welcome the challenge. Tell me I'm wrong. 1-800-357-0910. Back right after this on the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. There are a lot of people in this country that have come around to the idea that you govern the way you feel, not governed by the framework that was set up called the Constitution. It's not about what you and your party feel, but rather it's what's best for the entire country. Therein lies a great problem. Therein lies a great problem in how we look at this. Is the Constitution still relevant? That's a question for this half hour. 1-800-357-0910. Do you sense that there are a lot of people who think that it isn't? Has it become old-fashioned and outdated? Does it not really apply to our lives anymore? Those are questions that again, if you're President Obama, he's even said so much from time to time. The one time he said, kind of, if it weren't for the Constitution, I'd be able to do more. He alluded to that. Who says that? If you're a president that has promised to abide by the Constitution, carry it out. 1-800-357-0910. You can email me at gary.sutton@cumulus.com. Mike has been waiting patiently. Mike, thank you so much for your patience. You're next up on the Gary Sutton Show. Good morning to you.
Well, Gary, you're wrong. And I'm going to tell you exactly why.
Go ahead, Mike.
Nobody shredded the Constitution more than Abraham Lincoln. And I'll give you specific examples. In his first inaugural address, he said, "The Constitution prevents me from interfering with slavery." 2 years, and he said, "I will not do anything about it." Mm-hmm. 2 years later,
Emancipation
he got
Proclamation.
an executive order called the Emancipation Proclamation.
That's correct. Right after the Battle of Antietam.
He said he suspended the writ of habeas corpus.
Yes, he did.
When he was challenged in the Supreme Court that secession was legal, he imprisoned Supreme Court judges at the point of a gun. Now, Barack Obama hasn't done that, but Lincoln he seized and destroyed public property. He imprisoned the mayor of Baltimore, half anybody who disagreed with him, half the legislature of Maryland. He exiled duly elected officials, a senator from Ohio. I agree with John Jay. The Constitution is whatever you want it to be.
No. See, I disagree. And, you're right on Lincoln. There's no question. I've even talked about that in my show here myself. Okay, so this is not about what was, men are not the ones that we are putting our trust in here. The Constitution is what we're putting our trust in. And the problem is that the Constitution then becomes anything you want it to be. Mike, if you say I'm wrong, then it's anything you want it to be. I don't believe that that's the way they drew that up. And what tells me that is when I read and understand a little bit about the Federalist Papers, which I've read several times, and they tell me the spirit in which that was written up. So the idea that you're talking about then, and this is why you're wrong, Mike, is that you're out there trying to say, well, it's whatever I want it to be at the moment. That's not the way it's set up. It is very clear in what it says you can do. And it said, and I think, again, in the spirit in which it was written, which was a fear of what government can do when it is mishandled, was what led them to write this in the first place and to organize a government in a way that would take on those fears and put down specifically things that Congress could not do and specifically things that they could do. That's what they did. So I reject your idea that it's anything you want it to be. That came from a judge, by the way, in the Supreme Court that basically was sitting there saying, I can judge the Constitution. That's a much different perspective than you might get from other people in other branches of the government. So you choose that guy. That's fine. I'm choosing the Constitution. I'm choosing the Founding Fathers and what they wrote down, Mike. That's why you're wrong.
Well, can I give you one rebuttal?
Sure can. Go ahead.
Because I'm not saying it's what I want it to be. I'm saying the people in power are currently twisting it into whatever they want it to be. I believe it should be held to the letter. But let me ask you this one point.
Go ahead, Mike.
Do you think after they fought from King George, they would actually put the Supreme Court 5 lawyers appointed for life to rule over the entire country? They used to have nullification.
Right.
Any state that did not like what the Supreme Court did, if the residents of that state voted against it, so be it. That's a perversion of the Constitution to make the Supreme Court at 5 guys absolutely rule over everything. The Founding Fathers would never have stood for that.
Right.
They would never have stood for anything Lincoln did. They would certainly never stand for anything this guy's doing.
There's no question. There's no question. You're absolutely right on that, Mike. I'm with you the whole way. And the idea of life on good behavior, which is what it actually is, life on good behavior, to me, is far too much power for what is supposed to be the least offensive branch of government, which to me has become one of the most offensive branches of government, which is the judicial branch and the Supreme Court. And we sit back and we wait for them to, in essence, also skirt the job of the Congress, which is to legislate for the country. And that's where you go. If you don't like the Congress, you go to the courts. And by going to the courts, you can then legislate in kind of a backhanded way. Listen, I understand some of the weaknesses of the Constitution, but I'm saying it was a pretty good framework within which to operate. And the idea that there have been people from time to time, Lincoln in wartime decided to take a lot of power on himself that you would not get away with normally, and yet he did it. So does that make it right to do it now? That becomes kind of an elementary-ish argument if someone says, oh, well, Lincoln did it, therefore I can do it. We get that a lot of times from people who want to say, well, what about him? Or what about... I reject that kind of thing. You could say, yes, Lincoln was wrong then, but that was then. What about now? What about the times we're dealing in now and how we're dealing with the Constitution at the moment, Mike?
And I'm asking, how do we ever get back to that? Can I just bring up one more point, is that there were 3 states, Virginia, Rhode Island, and New York, when they ratified the Constitution, they said, only if we can secede whenever we wish, and that was granted them. Now, Virginia did so and was forced back in at the point of a gun.
Right.
And the reason Jefferson Davis was never tried was because it would be the legality of secession. Okay. Now, once a part of the Constitution is ripped out at the point of a gun, how are we ever going to get it back? All foreign aid is unconstitutional, is it not? There's nowhere where it says the Constitution, you can seize money from private citizens and hand it to a foreign power.
Right.
Okay. Now, how do we stop that?
There are things that are done that way. But the point is, as it applies to citizens of this country every single day, should this not be a limiting document instead of an empowering document?
It absolutely...
Or better yet, an enabling document. How's that sound?
It absolutely should be, but how do we get it back?
Well, therein lies the great question. How do you think we get it back, or do we? Or do you think the Pandora's box is flown too far open to get it back? Because you've raised a great point.
Well, sadly, there's no democracy that's really lasted more than about 200 years. And the Founding Fathers only wanted taxpayers to vote for specific reasons. That way you could not buy the voting public.
Right.
Since that was changed, that anybody with a pulse who wants to get anything free from the government can vote, it's almost impossible. I'd love to hear an idea, how do we take the country back and go to those founding rules? The fact that it's been so perverted, you can't really ignore the fact that it's been perverted and destroyed, but the plan to regain it, I'd love to hear that.
Well, maybe here it is. Maybe you should get back. This will really raise the cockles on people's head. Whatever cockle is, will raise the hair on the back of people's head. Last week, the president said everybody should have the chance to vote. What if you went back and said only those people that own property should have a chance to vote?
Exactly.
Yeah. What if you went back to that? The old landed gentry kind of idea that we started with. But people that have skin in the game have a chance to vote. Those who are just receiving, what would you think about that? 1-800-357-0910. Mike, I really appreciate the challenge of your call, the thought put into it, and it was good stuff. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I look forward to it. That's the kind of call I love. A challenge. And he said, Gary, I'm going to tell you where you're wrong. Good. And I love a good debate. I have great respect for those kind of calls. And Joe's call last hour. 1-800-357-0910. So what if we did that? That's a great point. What if we said you can't vote if you don't have skin in the game? What do you think about that? If you don't have skin in the game, you can't vote. Let me go to Terry in Lancaster. 1-800-357-0910. 2 lines open for you. We've been trying to get in. They've been jammed. Good morning, Terry. You're on the Gary Sutton Show. Welcome.
Yeah, hi. This is Terry.
Yeah, Terry. Good to have you in. Good morning to you.
Well, it's good to be here. I want to take kind of a different approach because
go ahead.
I don't believe you're living in the real world.
Okay.
The real world is that it really doesn't matter what the Constitution says. It doesn't matter what the laws say. For the past 6-7 years now, we have elected twice a president who has said, I don't care what's in the Constitution. I've got a telephone and I've got an ink pen and I'm going to do what I want. His attorney general that he appointed said the same thing. The attorney general of Pennsylvania agreed with him and said the same thing.
Yes, she did.
The only thing that matters anymore is political correctness. If it's politically correct and it's fair for everyone, that's all that matters.
No, I think you're wrong on that part.
The Constitution now is irrelevant.
Yeah, I think you're wrong on that part. I think what matters is political power. Okay, power. If you are the group in power, and then the political correctness can be inflicted upon you at that particular point.
Yeah, I got to watch out because my tongue keeps getting caught in my cheek here.
Okay. All right.
The argument that you're making is the power rules, but the power is in political correctness.
Right.
The people who voted him in and continue to support him and are now looking for a candidate like him are the people who are ruling today. The people who believe in the Constitution don't vote anymore. They've thrown up their hands and given up.
Yeah.
So now the rule is political correctness. And if you violate any what they perceive as political correctness, you are attacked, ostracized, belittled, shamed. The law says doesn't matter. It's all about political correctness.
Oh, I understand the reality of it. I think I understand the reality of it. I unfortunately, because, and as Joe said last hour, I have a great esteem for the offices that have been created. I have great esteem for the spirit in which they were created. I have great esteem for how they're supposed to operate. I realize how much of it has been bastardized over the years, not just by this president, but by others as well. I realize the damage that has been inflicted by many of the men and women in office. I understand that. But I also understand that somewhere the spirit still is prevalent out there for a lot of us, where we say we'd like to see a return to that. Now here's go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100%. Unfortunately, we don't have the votes anymore.
Yeah.
The political correctness, and this has been taught for 30 years, and the millennial generation, which outnumbers by far the boomer generation, they've got the votes now.
Well, that was my point I made the other day on those surveys that I've been looking at, that, old white guys are not going to be around all that much longer. And that's who's voting, for maybe the Constitution right now, and you better find a new generation. But the problem is when you grabbed hold of the education and you've indoctrinated, and when you grabbed hold of the media and you indoctrinate, and when you have those people eventually starting to become the millennials and the other generations coming in, the country's going to change. It's going to become something else, and it's not going to be the country that was a country governed by a constitution, but it's going to be the country governed by how we feel at the moment.
Yeah, and that's the real world. When I grew up, I was taught that if you didn't like the laws, you had to obey them anyway, and you grew up and you get them changed.
Yeah.
Today, if you don't obey the laws, well, that's okay. You just pick the ones you like, and just ignore the ones you don't like.
Or you almost obeyed them, Terry. You almost obeyed the laws. That's what it's about today. Terry, thanks so much for your call. Riley, I lost you there. Come on back in. We'll get you in. We have all lines open right now. First time all morning. 1-800-357-0910. What if we said that only those people can vote who have, some skin in the game, one way, shape, or form? I haven't thought this out a whole long time, but, if you own property, or if you had some skin in the game, or you somehow, had some stake in what was going on in the United States, wouldn't that be the way to go? So, Gary, that's blasphemy. You're going against the Constitution. Welcome. In vogue, right? I'm Gary Sutton. I take your calls right now. 1-800-357-0910. Come on in. Challenge me. Here on the News Radio 910 WSBA. We'll be back after this. So what I've gotten this morning is the Constitution basically is done. Is that it? No one's abided by it really for a while. We can go all the way back to Lincoln if we want to, that the Constitution is done. I'm going to dip into my email bag here for a moment and share a couple of emails here in the last few minutes. This one from Joe. It says, Gary, name an attorney general or president who actually upheld our immigration laws. You can't. Let's see. I go back. Jeez. I'd have to go back to maybe Nixon. Maybe. I'm not sure. I'm trying to think. What was Thornburg, the attorney general, who's the governor of Pennsylvania? I think Thornburg actually was a guy who upheld them. Who was he with? Was he with Reagan? Was he with George H.W. Bush? I think it might have been with George H.W. Bush. As far as race card being played here, I would hope that's enough to stop this woman from being approved. The country deserves better, and I am sick and tired. That's from Joe. Then I got another one here. Let's see. This was also from Joe. It said, hey, Gary, I blame the Republicans for the current occupant of the White House. If they would have given us someone to actually vote for, we wouldn't be suffering through 8 years of this guy. The 8 years of the Bush administration didn't help the Republicans either. And I'm not the Joe who just called. Okay, the Joe who just called, by the way, was fine this morning. I love calls like that. By the way, I'm going to put this hour up tomorrow on the Facebook.com/910WSBA if you'd like to hear it again or whatever. And speaking about Joe the caller, this was from Michael. And it said, Gary, I wish you had kept Joe the caller on through the break. I do too, Mike. I'm sorry, because I was making some decisions on the run there. I would have liked to kept Joe on and asked him to come back, but obviously he might have been busy or whatever. I heard you ask him to call back. He said Obama gave Congress plenty of time to pass immigration reform, but Congress didn't act, so Obama acted. I'd like to ask Joe if that means it would be okay for a president who is pushing for a tax cut to set a new lower rate if Congress doesn't act fast enough to pass a tax cut. That's a great point. It's a great point. Let's see. This was from Joel. It says this was on Twitter. The president acts like separation of powers is for fools. If Congress and the Supreme Court won't uphold it, then what? He gets to take over? This one from Dennis. I thought you'd appreciate this. I supported the president while I'm not willing to write him and his ideas off in full because we do share some fundamental ideas. I do have many disagreements in some of the things he has done, including his extending presidential powers beyond what was intended by our founding fathers. And no matter what side of the political fence you fall on, everyone should be concerned about extending presidential powers because it sets up precedents that may be used when the other side takes power. That is key. Have a pleasant day, Denny. Denny, you make a great point. You know, what happens when the other side goes in and they use the same kind of modus operandi to take care of the government? Because obviously they see it as what's good for the goose is good for the gander. No, they should see it as what's good for the populace of this country. They should see it as what are the rules that we go by. So here's where we're left this morning, and it's an uneasiness that I have. The Constitution doesn't matter anymore. The genie's out of the box. The bloom's off the rose. I'll cliche you to death here. That we can't put it back in. Humpty Dumpty's broken. That's a sad commentary, isn't it? So what do we need? What do we need to do to get back to where we need to go? Are we so rife with corruption and misuse of what our founding fathers gave us that's impossible to put it back together? Maybe. Are we able to find anybody, a group of people, who can put their selfish interests to the side and operate for the better good of all people in this country, not just some? Maybe. Can we find a group of people who say that all we need to do is go back and abide by the law? Unfortunately, and I think it's been pointed out by some people very, very well this morning in some great calls, that generationally, the people that hold on to those kinds of values are fading away. And those who have other kinds of values are taking over. And thus, we see an America that is going to change, whether we like it or not. And ultimately, the Constitution, while it may be there, will be kind of like the king or queen of England. It's there as a figurehead, but that's about all it represents. George Washington said something once, greatest president ever, in my opinion. He said, I hope I shall possess firmness and virtue enough to maintain what I consider the most enviable of all titles, the character of an honest man. Don't we yearn for that kind of spirit?